don't know about or they're not watching, all this information is out there if you do your research. It's how the government uses the military to spy on Americans. The expansion of our military's role in domestic intelligence gathering is alarming. During the Cold War and the Vietnam War, the U.S. military, Army specifically, illegally spied on American anti-war critics as well as protesters. Congress is not granted any power to use the military for domestic surveillance. Information has already surfaced about how the military is watching and maintaining files on anti-war protesters today. You know, anti-war protesters have a right to free speech, unless you do it at the funeral of a veteran killed in combat. This old East Texan calls that plain old disorderly conduct and disrespectful. Americans who have raised legitimate questions and demanded honest answers have had our patriotism questioned by the current administration. Any American who's not paying attention to Washington today is naive. The current administration is changing the way the government works. And here's just one example. I had 10, but I wanted to give you just one good one. Congress will be bypassed on major issues using the so-called executive orders, which fall under the control of federal agencies. For those of you who say this can't happen, recently the FCC was smacked down in court with Comcast versus the FCC, which held that the FCC has no justification to regulate the internet. Now the FCC chairman is considering reclassification of the internet as a phone company, so it can be regulated like a public utility. Have they done a very good job at that? According to David Walker, and of course he's the former U.S. Comptroller General and head of the Government Accounting Office, we currently have a $50 trillion unfunded liabilities on our shoulders, mostly from Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which makes up the bulk of Americans' $62 trillion in long-term debt. You know, politicians throw numbers around, a billion, it's only so many million, it's only so many billion. I tell you what, you need to do your research on the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion. I did, and boy, I got an eye-opener. If you take $62 trillion, now my little calculator at Divers Depot, you know, I bought it back in 1974 when I started that place, and it doesn't have enough digits on it to do the math. So I called a banker here in town, and he said, heck, mine won't do it either. I had to go online, find a wizard computer out there to do the math. But if you divide $62 trillion by 300 million Americans, guess what you get? Every man, woman, and child owes $200,000 just in this unfunded mandates that are coming at us. The percentage of Americans who pay no federal income tax for 2009 has risen to 47%. The bottom 40% not only pay no income tax, but the government sends them cash and benefits, finances from the taxes paid by those of us who do pay income tax. I got a problem with that. Today, for the first time in history, more money comes out of Social Security than goes into it. What are we going to do about that? I'm with you, brother. All right. The 10th Amendment deals with the power not granted to the federal government belongs to states or to the people. That's what it says. Let me remind you that it was Congress and not us, the people, who had a chance to vote on the health care bill. I spoke a year ago at the Tea Party and mentioned something called HRC 50. Here's a little update on it. The House here in Texas affirmed, the HRC 50, first of all, would have affirmed that the state of Texas claims sovereignty under the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and it would ask the federal government to cease and desist from mandates they're not authorized to impose on Texans. Well, the good news is it passed the House. The bad news is it reached the Senate with no further action. The good news is our local state representative, Wayne Christian, who's here today, is going to bring it back again, only this time with a mandate to vote it into law. You go, Mr. Christian. That's the kind of leadership we need in Texas. Well, let me have a little exercise again in voting. All those in favor of reconfirming the First, the Second, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution as it's written, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carried. Thank you for being loyal Americans. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, EK. Yeah, I did want to mention about, we have a couple of distinguished guests here. We have State Representative Wayne Christian. Where are you at, Wayne? There he is. We also have our Congressman Louis Gomer here. Now, I know this Tea Party might be a little more fun if we're in some other district where we're trying to kick somebody out as hard as we can. But before y'all all grab your